And now, I would like to welcome from the U.S. Army, Mr. Patrick Nicely and Mr. Bradley Jumper, to talk about risk management.
Good morning. I'm Chief Warrant Officer 2, Bradley Jumper. I serve in the National Guard as an information systems technician. On the civilian side, I serve as a senior risk management framework information assurance analyst. I have over 15 years of experience, a few degrees, several IT certifications.
Hey, good morning. My name is Patrick Nicely. Same information systems technician for the Alabama Army National Guard and principal cybersecurity analyst for Northrop Grumman. We'll be doing a brief overview of risk management for you this morning. This is our agenda. So answering the question, what is risk management? So risk management is the process of continually identifying, assessing, and trying to control or mitigate risk. As displayed by the diagram here, it is a continual process throughout the life cycle of any system. What you'll begin with is your assets, identifying your assets of human capital, your facilities, proprietary hardware, proprietary software. Now those assets are endangered by threats, both internal and external. That could be anything from an insider threat to external hackers to environmental hurricanes, tornadoes, sandstorms, anything of that. Anything that's going to decrease your ability to conduct operations is going to be considered a threat. Now those threats, they exploit vulnerabilities in your systems. And your vulnerability could be anything from not doing updates, not having patches on your systems, not having efficient physical security, not having adequate policies in place to dictate your governance. And the way those threats will come in will be due to exposures on your system. And for an exposure, you think of your attack surface is what do you have available on your system that allows an attacker to get in. We kind of went over a few of them in the previous presenters, but if you think of a firewall, if you have a host system, firewall is completely open, that will allow an attacker to get into your system and exploit it. Now your assets, threats, vulnerabilities, exposure, those will all have either a quantitative number assigned to it for severity, or you can have a qualitative high, medium, low assessment. And all that will go into your risk and your risk categories. And from that risk category, you will determine your safeguards, your mitigations. How do you plan on lowering that risk and proceeding forward and continuing to conduct operations or business? Here we have some examples of the risk response methods. Your mitigation is you applying security controls, you applying patches, updates. If you have to move services someplace that's away from an environmental danger. You also have transfer of risk. This is mostly associated with moving things to a third party. Say you have an on-premise email server. Not only do you have the cost of the hardware and maintenance, but you also have the cost of employing technicians to work on it. You can offload that to a third party and have your SLA or insurance policy with that to make sure that is protected and in compliance with any sort of regulatory agencies. Your next step, and probably the least probably acceptable one, would be avoidance, and that's where hey, we have this risk, but we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to say we don't have it. Good example would be security through obscurity. We're just going to pretend like nobody's going to pick up on it and hope they don't. And then your final risk response is acceptance. There's two ways to look at acceptance. One is you've done everything that you can through your mitigation strategy, and at that point, you just have to accept that risk. Or you would accept it in the case that to try and mitigate anything to it, it's like if you wanted to lock down all of your systems and that would stop you from conducting business, you would just accept that risk.
So all of your risk responses are going to fall into one of the three main control categories. As you can see from the graphic, you start with the assets, so it's a layered defense, right? And you kind of see how those different controls fit into a layered defense or defense in depth. So you start with the assets, and then you have administrative controls outside of your assets. That's going to be your plans, your policies, your procedures that are written, documented, and they're approved by senior officials within your organization, and they're enforced. They're going to dictate what happens at the logical control and physical control part. Your logical or your technical controls is that next layer. That's going to be your authentication, encryption, PKI, baseline system configurations for your servers, for your IDS, IPS configurations, all of those things, all of your technical controls. And then outside of that, you would have your physical controls. And that's your, in your building, do you have a fence up, exterior lighting, alarm systems, security guards, that type of thing. All right, and so inside of those control categories, you have the control types. There are several control types. The first one is preventive. Preventive is basically anything that stops unauthorized activity, right? That's going to be your intrusion prevention system because it intervenes and stops things from happening. Disabling unused services, all right? If you have unused services and there's an exploit out there that hackers are using to exploit your systems, you disable it and you've now prevented that from happening, at least from that avenue. You have deterrent control types. The deterrence is like anything that's going to change somebody's mind, an attacker's mind, right? So if you have a honeypot and you have a message up there saying, hey, turn away now, or exterior lighting that pops on when somebody approaches your facility, it's going to deter them from doing that. And then the next control type is detective. So IDSs, right? Intrusion detection, that's something that's going to allow you to see unauthorized activity going on within your network, within your systems. So IDSs are audit log reviews. System administrator, right? Part of that job is to review audit logs so that if you see any weird things happening. Compensating controls. Compensating controls is something that's going to make up the shortcomings of a primary control. So you have a data classification policy that prevents users or prohibits users from taking data from one classification level, moving it to another. Sometimes that doesn't always work, and users sometimes don't really do what we want them to do. So you have a data loss prevention system on the host that would maybe look for a particular classification or a host file or a file extension, and it'll stop it from leaving that system. So that's compensating control. Corrective control is really where your mitigations fall in. If you have a user that downloads a malicious file from email, you would run antivirus software on that system, and that would correct the issue. Data restoration, so your server goes out or your system or your building goes down from like a natural disaster, generator fails, you have a data restoration plan or DRP at a offsite location, you can resume your services from there. That's corrective control type. And then you have lastly directive, which is policy. That falls back under administrative controls. That's anything written that gives instructions. Acceptable user policy, or acceptable use policy that dictates what users can and cannot do on your network and your systems. Next slide. So everything within cybersecurity should fall under some sort of risk management framework so that you have a life cycle or a process to work through all the issues, all the security issues. But that gives you a systematic way of handling all of the things, all of the issues that come about or approach your network. Just a listing of them. This risk management framework, that's what I myself and Chief Nicely follow within our organization. I just listed some other ones there. The Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, or COSO. ISACA's Risk IT Framework. And you have Octave, FAIR, and Terra are just some of the mainstream risk management frameworks. But if you'd like to have, I know this is a very broad, brief overview due to time constraints, but if you want a better understanding of risk management and how they'll fit within your organization, I highly recommend looking at these frameworks. And thank you all for having us and allowing us to speak today.